Welcome to this video. I am sat here with Brendan Ford from Rare Games in Leicestershire, and we are going to be talking about the roles that stories take in games, and his work as a narrative designer on previous sort of work and on what you're working on now, as much as you can say, of course.
Yeah.
Welcome, Brendan. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing good. How's it going?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Um, so you are a narrative designer,
Yes.
and what is that? So
Good
some people might
question.
not kind of like. I think when we think about games, it's like, oh yeah, I know about play testers and coders and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
but you're a narrative designer. What
Yeah.
what is that?
It's sort of it's the story department of a video game, but not solely on writing, which would be more like the scripts and that kind of stuff. It's more cross department than that. It's the looking at the narrative in the broadest sense of characters and arcs and structure across a game, but also on a mechanical level of how does story impact the individual elements of a game, right down to like granular stuff like the details behind objects and lore and the um, the guns that a character in a sci-fi game might use. Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of sounds like you probably work closely with like the environment artists as well and things like that,
Yeah.
or is that kind of a
Yeah.
role you take on as well?
um, Without going into like detail on Everworld, there's definitely like a lot of cross-discipline stuff in the meetings I would have wouldn't necessarily just be with other writers, other narrative designers, or other creatives. It would be across people from all different departments of the game development team, looking at what they're doing and what we're doing and how we can sort of collaborate and work together on those elements.
Okay, that
Um,
sounds cool.
yeah.
And so is that, I mean, I think some people kind of think that making games to some degree is still like someone in their basement, like throwing together stuff kind of Minecraft style.
At the moment, it more than ever kind of is because we're all doing it from our bedrooms.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. Um, so you work a lot with the different departments. Is that just because of your role, or is that quite typical within the industry in general? Do you think
Um,
lots of people have
I,
lots of kind of meetings and stuff?
I think more so than ever, I think because of the pandemic, there's a lot more sort of cross-discipline meetings, everybody keeping everybody in the loop. Whereas when you're in the office together, you're probably a bit more water cooler, kept up to date on certain things, kind of stuff. Um, but I think in general, from what I found, like even at like Unread, which was like this, a really small scale team, a startup kind of vibes as well. Like there's always between each of the departments, the producers are talking to the tech people, and the tech people are coming to the narrative people, and it's very much about making sure that each element feeds into the other.
Yeah, like because you mentioned, with the narrative design, it's not a case of I've written the story, here's the story, go make the
Yeah.
game. Like it's there are these parts, or I suppose the challenge of actually getting the idea out of your brain and getting the implementers to understand that story, and then that world
Yeah.
that you're crafting, because a story isn't just you know Bob went to the shop, brought an apple, came home. Like it's
Yeah.
you have these characters and they have incredibly rich backstories, and like you mentioned, the story arcs and all of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And is that a challenge to try and, I suppose,
It
kind of
is.
focus what
Yeah, like a huge part of it is how do you communicate that to people of all different disciplines to make sure that it's fed into every aspect of the piece of content you're making. Like Unread, it was much more, we'd be writing, because it was sort of a text-based mobile game that syncs to your phone, so you've got this stream of text messages, live streams, all of that kind of stuff, very ARG-esque, that you can sort of bounce between and experience how you want to. So with that was kind of, we'd be having conversations with the tech people to make sure that people could access what they wanted when they wanted and view it how they wanted. And if we wanted a character to be location tracked, or if we wanted a live stream to pop up, or for a player to receive a phone call, then that would go to the tech department. But then to produce that, we'd need to go to the producers. We'd need to build really like communicative documents for them to be able to take that and go find actors and voice actors and come back, because you don't want to have come back after all those hours with something that's, oh no, that's not ideal. What I had in mind, I will do, kind of thing, which rarely or never happen.
Yeah.
But it works both ways as well. It's the sort of the most fun aspect about it is, as often as I could go to somebody and say like, oh, here's this page thing I've got, can we make it happen, kind of thing. You get people come to you saying, hey, we've got this really cool new feature we want to add. Does it work? Could it go into the story? How could we make it happen? That kind of stuff. And especially on a big team, that's really fun because so many ideas are coming out.
So could that be like an actual new technology from the sort of game engine or implementation point, or could it be like they're like, oh, I've got an idea for a new character, and you're like, no, I've already written a very balanced story, thank you.
I mean, like, I think that's part of like the job, is that kind of adaptability. I'm going to say things that aren't real words, and I'm going to say them with confidence, so nobody will ever know.
As long as you say, as long as you believe it, the rest of us will.
That comes up a lot. I've had conversations with Kate quite a lot where I just start like waffling on about something. She's like, I'm pretty sure you made up half those words, but because you're a writer, I can't conflict you on it, combat you on it.
You're the words man.
Yeah, I'm the words man. So, it does happen a lot where people come to you with that kind of stuff, and it can be new technology. Like I think, again, I can't speak to Rare on that, but that certainly happened at Unread, where we would have meetings or sessions where the developers would say, hey, we've just made this new functionality for video calls, or for a new way that the player can choose between multiple endings and have an impact on the story that's being told. And we would then be able to go away and take that knowledge and be like, well, I'm working on this thing at the moment. I've written these drafts and poured hours and hours into this. But it would be a huge shame to not take that technology that's been developed and implement it, or the art designs that have been mocked up, and find a use for them. Or another writer, especially on Red, it was cool because the other writers were working on their stories, because you'd take ownership of a story, at least while I was at Unread. I don't know what they're doing now. So you'd find another story where somebody had a really cool character, or a really cool like location or world piece of design they'd worked on, and they'd be like, oh, I want to take that character and put them in my story. So now they're gonna feed in across these stories.
Yeah, that's nice. That's very nice. And I guess kind of when you're on the small scale stuff, you take on more responsibilities, but you have more freedom in a sense to kind of lead things. I think a lot of students nowadays, they kind of got their eyes on the AAA studios, but actually you've got to kind of cut your teeth under the indie stuff and learn some key skills that you can then transfer to.
It's funny, like, because now that I've done that time at a startup and now on the sort of the AAA flashier side of things, so many of those skills transfer really organically. But at the same time, it is a different beast. It's I think like no matter what scale studio you go on, I think it's quite easy to glamorize the sort of idea of I want to go and work at Rockstar straight away kind of thing. That actually like if there's like a local small independent studio working on something interesting and unique, then that can absolutely like be such a informative place to go.
And I guess they got more freedom to, you know, be creative and push things outside the box. Whereas when, you know, companies like Rare are investing millions, it's like we have to get a product out. Like it needs to make a profit. Otherwise we're in trouble. And they kind of sometimes stick to what they know a little bit. Like, and that's not just Rare. That's like a lot of the big companies. Call of Duty.
I like that story.
Yeah, I like the story too. We all remember the Chernobyl mission.
Exactly, the Chernobyl mission and the nuke mission. That's amazing. I'd love to work on a Call of Duty. I feel like you could just turn around and be like, "Hey, should we like nuke a country?" And they'd be like, "Yes,
yes,
brilliant."
And then fly some super Black Hawks through, and like you know, and then it will be super awesome. Yeah, like,
exactly.
Just dial it up to 11.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
definitely.
So we sort of talked about you know, some of the things you do, and obviously meetings are quite common and things like that.
They are.
Is there anything else like your average week kind of? How does that go? How would that be?
It would be plenty of meetings. I guess like you know, at Rare, I'm early days. I'm a few months in, so I'm in the calm at the moment with that one. But definitely on the sort of unread when you're sort of midway into one of those projects, meeting after meeting, and then sort of getting those documents out, lots of rewrites. You know, if the start of the week you write something, the rest of the week you're going to be rewriting it and perfecting it kind of thing. And I think that's true no matter where you're working. You're constantly evolving everything you're doing and taking on feedback. And then, what else do I do? Who knows?
You're definitely selling it. It sounds like
lots of research, actually. I think that's at Rare as well. That's one of the things that I like. I think it's really great when you're at a company that sort of you can have the time to sort of breathe and ingest as much as you're sort of outputting, because then you're only going to enrich the stuff that you're producing if you've taken the time to really research it and make sure that it's well thought through and has a lot of influences being poured into it from a lot of different places. That's
and is that from just like reading about stories, or is it from like a games point of view, or are you just justifying your extensive gameplay and with research?
That would be fun, actually. I should do that more.
Just
playing Ghost of Tsushima for some research. Everything. I mean, I like looking at history. I find that always, like, if something's coming from a foundation of reality, it can sometimes be as useful as looking at a really cool game or story or that kind of thing. Articles, news, it's very dependent on what you're writing about. So the sort of stuff I research while I'm working on Everwild is a lot different than what I was researching while I was at Unread, because at Unread I might be doing a haunted house horror one day, so I'd be looking at people who think they've seen ghosts telling their stories kind of thing, or I'd be doing the American justice system, so that would just be a week of making sure I'm as knowledgeable on that as humanly possible as a non-American writing about it. And Everwild, which red dot on my head.
Yes. Yeah. I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. Like, you know, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. So I definitely don't want to compromise anything there. I can say I've watched the trailer, and yes, very impressive. I got kind of again. Don't feel free. Don't breach anything. I don't want to get you in hot water. But I got like a really nice like save the world type, look after nature vibe from it. Like I was kind of getting East Asia Monster Hunter Pokemon type. There's all these elaborate animals in the world, and let's just that's just okay. That's just the world. Like we're not going to explain that. They just live there. But rather than in like Monster Hunter, where it's like we must kill them all, like Pokemon, it's let's enslave them for our own entertainment. It kind of seemed like, you know, we need to look after these animals, like and help them. And again, I don't want to cause you to say
that is
but
interesting and awesome. You got that from the trailer.
Yeah. Oh, that's good then.
And yeah, like natural influences have been really really great to look at on this project. I think that's you can definitely tell from the trailer that there's sort of a real natural aspect.
Yeah, it's almost like a one planet vibe, you know, kind of like a we are all, you know, we're all here and that's it. Like, you know, and I guess that's a positive message, and games have a way of, you know, letting us embody that message, or you know.
Well, I have absolutely no comment on any of the above. Awesome that you got those vibes.
I just getting a thumbs up, and that's it.
just love to hear people's thoughts on the trailer.
Yeah, I bet. Do you ever like? Do you see the trailers before they go out? Do you get like an internal feed of them, or show them to anyone?
I mean, people at the company work on those kind of things. So I think there's, you know, it's a part of the process. But with those trailers, or the most recent trailer, actually, I saw that for the first time with everybody else, because that trailer came out, I think, a couple of days. I think it was within a week of me starting at Rare. Oh. So I think I like, in fact, I know what it was. I got my my offer for the role the morning before that trailer aired. So it was sort of like, hey, here's your offer. We can't wait to let you see more of the game, kind of vibes. Yeah. So yeah, that was quite fun actually. We were sort of, I was able to sort of get downstairs and be like, right, I've got the job, and we can sort of sit around tonight, and there's this Xbox showcase, and maybe we'll be able to get a new glimpse at what I'm going to be working on.
And yeah, I mean, that kind of brings us nicely round to something I wanted to actually ask you about, which is how you really kind of got into the industry. I mean, I know that, or it might just be me because I work with the game students. So all I ever see is all the students wanting to get into the games industry. But, you know, it is a very popular kind of industry. It has that kind of allure that lots of young people, you know, are drawn to. And kind of, you know, what was your experience kind of going from your university days to where you are now? And you know,
it's I think it's kind of interesting in a way, because I didn't have any kind of games background initially, because when I was at uni, my course was script writing for film and television, and I remember in sort of around second year of university, because I kind of always knew I wanted to write games. It was sort of like, this course looks really cool and really interesting. I'm going to go do this course and learn how to write. But I kind of know I want to steer it in a certain direction. And I remember speaking to my lecturers and sort of being like, are we going to be doing game stuff? Can we look at games? And my lecturers were sort of on the standpoint of like, games? What? Games? Stories and games? What do you mean? Like shooting people kind of thing. So I used to sneak into the games lectures across the hall occasionally. So yeah, I was sort of going from scratch a bit. So I got lucky in that I sort of applied to every interesting looking games writing job out there. And yeah, I don't think my applications for like senior writer at Ubisoft probably got past, you know, a quick glance of like, this, what is he doing? But while I was doing that, I was sort of looking at, well, I can send them a cover letter saying I really want to work for games, and I can maybe write a couple of game scripts, but what else can I do? So I started writing feature films, and I wrote a few feature film scripts, and they were all really high concept stuff that were kind of inspired by games. Like I wrote a sci-fi that was kind of inspired by Prey, and I wrote a Victorian story that was kind of inspired by Dishonored. And I refined those and used, and they actually got a bit of recognition from a few of the awards, sort of script writing competition things they do. So I got some recognition at the BBC and a few other things.
Wow.
And thanks to that, I was then able to start applying for like smaller companies with a bit more success. And this was sort of early third year. I'd got a bit of recognition under my belt. So I was able to start applying for those. And then it was Unread that got back to me sort of on the last third of university. They got back to me, and I did a writing test to sort of prove that I'm not pulling this out of my ass. And I left uni early to go and work for those. And it was quite lucky, that sort of side of things, because I was their first employee. Like, it was the two founders, and they brought me on board, and it was very small and sort of like, we're starting this thing, you know, we're not sure how it's going to go. And I was probably quite cheap as well because I was a student. So that side of things, I think there was a huge amount of luck involved. But I think the thing that maybe worked in my favor there was from pretty much second year, I was like, right, I'm going to start writing down a career plan. I'm going to start figuring out how I can build my portfolio. What can I do? And then when I was at Unread was the real like, right, now I want to take the next step in this, you know, eventually, because I really enjoyed what I was working at Unread. But I sort of knew like the next step from here was going to be into these sort of, I think at the time I called it like console games, but just sort of 3D, those kind of games instead of the sort of text-based mobile games that I was writing. And that was where it was like, right, I need a portfolio that's kick-ass. And I ended up, this is how over the top I went. I ended up writing a bunch of portfolios, each 15 pages long, with different writing samples and different Twine games that I'd made for different genres of games. That way, for each scale of studio and what they worked on, I had a portfolio ready to be like, right, you're this genre, that kind of thing, and you're this one, that kind of thing. And as well, like when you apply for jobs as a writer as well, they get you to do a writing test. So every time you do a writing test, you kind of gain an extra piece of field portfolio. So they kind of stacked up. So after a while, and then networking events as well. I went to. For me, it was the Writers Guild. They do networking events specific for games, which is great because I found out on Twitter where one was going to be. I went along, and like, I'm turning around thinking like, oh, I wonder what kind of people I'm going to meet. And then you're turning around being like, hey, who are you? And they're like, oh, I'm like the lead narrative designer on Watch Dogs Legion or something.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay, sweet. I think I found the right room.
I'm immediately the least qualified person in this room.
Yeah, but then the great thing there was everybody is so encouraging and lovely and wonderful that I've encountered in the games industry. I've been to TV networking events before where they're like, who are you? Please leave. Whereas game events, they're like, small indie mobile thing I've never heard of. Please, like, I'll download it. Let's see all about it. Tell me about you. It's a really lovely industry like that. And
that comes up a lot in the industry. There's like this kind of, once you're in, it's like, let's look after each other. Let's share as much as we can. And, you know, and we have so many people, you know, like yourself, take time to actually share and, you know, help young people try to get into, or old people, I suppose, or new people trying to develop their skills and, you know, get into it. I think it's quite magical.
I think it's a young industry, it's a growing industry, and it's one where like everybody just wants to find like the most talented and the most passionate people and get them in. And I, absolutely have found that to be the case everywhere, and everyone I've spoken to in the games industry. I don't think I've ever encountered any sort of dismissiveness or hostility in sort of that respect. I say from a privileged perspective.
Yeah.
I should clarify as a white straight male, but I think that's sort of, we're seeing some change with that as well.
Yeah, I hope so.
So and then during the sort of coronavirus period, I was between jobs, which is when Rare came along and concluded my journey. And it was just a sort of quite great, really, because this really is sort of a dream project for me to be working on. And if you'd sort of asked me when I was in that uni stage, like, what would you love to be working on? Everything that is unspeakable about Everwild is exactly what would have sort of exactly what got me out of bed and writing portfolios.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's really inspiring, really, to hear that you kind of knew where you wanted to go, and you worked so hard. And you probably say maybe you didn't, and maybe you were lucky, and I think you do need that. But I think creative people, we're so nervous about putting ourselves out there, because like I always tell my students, like, oh, what have you done? Let's see what you're doing, and they don't want to share in front of their peers and stuff, which I guess you kind of get. But there needs to be this point where you kind of start to go, right, I'm not going to go anywhere unless other people start seeing what I'm doing. I don't know if you kind of had that moment where
I'm quite introverted with my work, ironically, for making a AAA game. But it's things like when I made, and I think there's something that can be said of, like, you don't necessarily have to really publicly promote yourself. Like, if you are putting the time in, I got lucky with Unread in that I put the time in and there was an opportunity there. But I do think if you put the time in and you keep building your portfolio and sort of building a sort of catalogue of your abilities and developing your skills, the right opportunity will eventually come along, even if it's a little bit later down the line, even if it's a little bit trickier, especially since there's not networking events and things like that now. But when I was doing that stuff, like when I was making Twine games, like little interactive fictions and things to showcase what I could do, I didn't tweet about them. I didn't sort of say or post on Facebook or whatever, being like, hey, please come and look at my new thing. I'm not great for that sort of thing, but what I did do is just put them in my portfolio, put a link to them. I built a website and put them on the website, and I, that stuff was sort of for applications purposes and for sharing with like recruiters or people who could sort of help me along the way. I'd get feedback from people who I trusted. So I think like a lot, there's a lot of like, make a game, put it out there, that kind of stuff. It's like, make a game, show off your skill. But like, if the idea of like putting it in front of as many people as possible and having a bunch of people give their opinion and making you crawl up into a ball and cry, then like, show it with who you want to share it.
Yeah.
But just make it because it should be made.
It should be. And how did you, kind of keep the motivation to keep doing that? Or was it unemployment or largely motivated? Because it can be tough, right? To just, you finish one thing and it's like, right, well, that's done. Now I just need to do another one. Like,
I mean, it can be devastating. I think it's just absolute persistence. Like, I mean, I guess you have to have a level of sort of blind certainty if this is going to be good, like this is going to work out. But so it doesn't always immediately. So at uni, it was just like, I think at uni my thought was, I'm here, I know what I want to do, so I'm literally just going to every day do everything I can to make sure I do. That's not to say I didn't spend plenty of time just mindlessly gaming and drinking beer, but I also put in the
life experience.
Was doing that. Yeah, exactly. Life experience, enriching my soul, kind of stuff. Yeah. But then after Unread, it was a good few months. We had to move out of London. We moved in to Kate, who your cousin, in with Kate's parents, And I was working in Sainsbury's for a little while I was between, just to sort of keep going, because that's the way it can happen sometimes. And I don't think there's any sort of shame in, like, when you finish uni, everybody sort of goes off in different directions. Like, from my course, I think somebody went off to Disney, and somebody went off to MTV, and somebody went off here, and then a couple of people just sort of went and waited and that kind of stuff. But it's just sort of like, okay, this isn't where I want to be right now, but I'm only going to change that by just, like, this evening, put a bit of time in, update my portfolio, write some new writing samples, maybe do some things for, like, different genres that I'd love to write for, and start applying and watch as the rejections can fill up, and just be persistent with it. Because eventually, like, nothing can happen for a long time, and then it can suddenly happen all at once. Like, Rare, I think, from my first interview, like, the next day I was speaking to the creative director, and the writing test went really well, and so it was a really, like, rapid process with that, because it was just like everything clicked kind of perfectly with that one. Whereas that's not always the case.
No, unfortunately not. We have wandered slightly off the topic of stories, but I do. That's what we were meant to be talking about. But I've actually really enjoyed it. Like, your story is an interesting story to hear about, and I think students in general are gonna kind of, I think it can be simultaneously reassuring that it is possible. Like, you can, and also when you realize that, like, the amount of work that's required to get there and then continue to stay there, I think it can be quite enlightening. But
that's the thing, like, if gaming is something you want to do, then it's still really fun. Like, when I'm writing these portfolios, I don't think I was ever sat there like, God, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? This is awful. Instead, I was going into the room being like, oh, I'm going to write, like, a sci-fi thing tonight. Yeah. And just have a blast doing it.
And so, of those, like, stories that you were writing and things, is there, like, one that you would love to see get made? Like, have you got, like, a baby that's, like, your favorite, or do you kind of do you just keep evolving those ideas?
Kind of. I mean, there's stuff that, like I've been writing a novel, so that's that side of things. I guess, like, if there's stories that I want to see get made, then I'll kind of figure out where to put them, because it doesn't. I think what tends to be the case is, like, you're going somewhere as a narrative designer where, like, the creative directors and like the project is happening. I don't think there'd really be a scenario where I'd sort of go and say, like, here's something I've been thinking about. But I definitely think about things like mechanics and storytelling methods that I'd love to see in a game. Things like a way of telling a story in a game I'd love to sort of see one day. And I think my portfolio and some of my Twine games sort of are on that side of things, that kind of, like, here's some narrative designing that I'm quite curious about that could be interesting.
So actual kind of, not necessarily the story, the story doesn't really matter. It's more about implementing that way of telling it.
Like, I think if I was sat down one day thinking, like, God, I really wish I could write something like, I'm looking at the book Dune, I really wish I could write something like Dune, then the only thing stopping me would be sort of, what, do I want to write a book like Dune? Do I want to write a script like Dune? Whereas, like, mechanics and storytelling techniques that are exclusive to games, I can only scratch that itch through writing for games.
Yeah. And I mean, like you kind of say about, the storytelling mechanics, I think particularly in, like, the last 10 years, like, the evolution of those technologies has kind of simultaneously made your job easier and so much worse. Because, like, you do have these opportunities to, like, embed these stories. Like, it's not the hit you in the face, follow this triangle, this is the story type. It's the, stumble across a building and investigate what the story behind the people who might live there be, and all of this kind of open worldness that we're really hammering on at the moment. And it's like you have usually, not all the time, you kind of have that linear narrative of like Fallout 3, you've been abandoned, like, oh no, you've got to find your dad, like that's kind of the linear part. And then you have all of these parts off of it, that you could either explore or not explore. Like you could just travel down one path and never touch any of the other narrative, or spend a lot of time wandering around the world. And like you say, there's all these stories hidden kind of in there that you may or may not encounter, and like I guess finding ways to put those stories across. And
yeah, absolutely. And I think the ones that excite me as well are the ones that don't have traditional writing, don't have scripts or voice actors or talking ones, like Journey and Abzu really intrigue me, or even something I think to slightly different, but like Celeste, where like, though it's not like a hard character arc, that kind of thing, actually everything is feeding into the story, the environment, the world that you're exploring, the aesthetics, the music, all of these elements are coming together to give you an emotional experience. And I think sort of factored in with the sort of the Fallout and the sort of systemic storytelling games, and how like even just like platformers and those kind of things have storytelling techniques throughout them. It's really cool now to sort of, because you never quite know from watching any kind of previews or trailers for a game which ones are going to be the ones that pack a huge emotional punch, because now sort of the limit is the imagination of the people who are creating it, which is really cool and really exciting. It's sort of, I feel like there was sort of a time where you'd sort of look at the story of a game and the gameplay of a game as two kind of separate things. So you'd sort of, if you were sort of casting judgment on a game, you'd be like, oh, the story's cool, it's a bit like this, but the gameplay is really cool, it's a lot like this. The art, I don't know, it's a bit like this. Whereas I think more as time's evolved, in the last 10 years or so especially, all of those are really feeding into each other and really like working in tandem more, and we look at games as sort of the whole instead of the components.
Yeah. And even really, I mean, you could be a level designer, prop designer, or making characters, vehicles, architecture, and there's still that story there. You still need to be kind of clear on what you're projecting through your work, even if it is a case of you've got to make some trees.
I mean, like, exactly.
Okay, well, what world
there's so much storytelling.
Like, and it's like, are they like all the foliage kind of, it builds the world, and like, is it a healthy world? Is it dying? Is it from across the universe? Like,
without putting myself out of a job, I think like absolutely people from all of the different disciplines and games, I think now start to think of like, what is the emotional experience the player will have when they experience this part of the game. So when your students might be making something that's just a puzzle game, or like I've played games that are like Candy Crush, those kind of, I don't know what they call them, the sort of jewel smasher things. Like I've played versions of those that are like full of storytelling, and it kind of just goes to show that like whether you are Call of Duty with the big cinematic like huge explosive stories, or you're like something on a really small scale that's kind of built around a single mechanic, you're sort of, or like a Tetris or something along those lines, actually there's so much potential to sort of not necessarily have characters pop up and say, I'm this person and I want to do this, and this is stopping me getting there, but just finding ways through all of those different components of a game to put storytelling into that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Angry Birds is a pretty good example. It's a slingshot mechanic, like, and it's based on a score. You gotta kill the birds or the pigs or whatever. Like, that's it. That is the game. But actually, there's some they slowly introduce these new characters and like eventually some new mechanics, and you start to actually kind of start to feel motivated, and you're like, I've got to actually overcome this enemy, and you start to realize who the protagonists are, and it's like I'm actually like living the story now. Like, I'm just.
They made a movie on it. There was so much.
Yeah,
it's sort of like even like the one that surprises me is like Fortnite and Warzone. Like I hop online every so often, and people like know those characters. And in Warzone, there's like a continuing story over what's sort of an arena shooter.
Yeah.
But like there must be a team of people at Activision sort of thinking about what's the continued story we're telling throughout this sort of game where people just drop in and murder each other for half an hour.
Yeah. And like Destiny 2 is a bit like that as well. Like it has narrative more so than the others, but like occasionally, it's like, this person's been defeated, but there's a bigger boss coming. And like there's a whole new season of these people who are just playing online, and they've got all these new raids and all the lore and the story and the loot and everything that's just been added. And like I guess if you put the early groundwork in, you can like evolve the game. You don't need to, like in even 5-10 years ago where it was like, right, well that one's done, so now here's like game number 2, and like here's game number 3.
Exactly.
You can actually like just let them evolve and let the community, like you say, kind of pick up their favorite characters, and they'll generate like people they hate, like characters they hate and characters they love, and you can kind of play with their hearts a little bit with that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like just sort of putting your head in a space that's sort of like, what can I do here just to sort of grip people with that storytelling stuff? If you're doing a side-scrolling shooter and you've got a really badass-looking robot, how much of an impact does it have on the player if actually you switch that badass-looking robot to like a scrawny-looking dude or an elderly woman or something like it's something far like that, but just a mindset of like, well, actually, this could really create something a bit unique or a bit sort of emotionally engaging from something as simple as that.
Yeah. And I guess, you get lots of customer creation stuff that kind of is a really nice mechanic for embedding the player. Like, they feel like they have some onus over the protagonist once they've, given them a ridiculously small head and big shoulders and tiny arms. And like, it's like, that's my character. They may look like a complete and utter freak, but that's my freak.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, decision in games is something like, I know, like when I speak to other people who want to do games and stuff, I get asked about that a lot. I get asked about like, what do you do when you want to have all these branching things and all these big consequences and all this kind of stuff? And I'm like, well, actually, like, engaging story decisions can be as simple as like something that's not going to impact the entire game, but just how do you respond to a certain thing? Do you kill somebody or do you walk away? Do you break this or not? And something as simple as like, what t-shirt do I put on my character has such a big impact on how you actually identify with the game.
Yeah. And you get those players that like to explore any potential narrative that's embedded, like...
Yeah, this is my problem.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was Left 4 Dead 2, the first time you just come across like a jukebox. It's like, I mean, no one would have spent the time. Like, surely no one's programmed this. Like, you just give it a bump and like it goes off, and then like all the zombies start pouring in on you. And it's like, that's just a nice little extra story because it resolves itself pretty quickly. Like, it's on, it comes on, it causes a chaos of like, and then I get through it, and then that story's resolved, and I'll carry on. But it's just nice to have that kind of, flexibility, I suppose, to be able to just put those little...
You probably remember that moment as well more than when you walk through a room and kill 30 zombies with a machine gun. You remember turning on a jukebox.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's all part of the experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whew. Well, we have talked a lot about all sorts of things. Not that I don't want to be like, you're boring now.
Last bit I could just waffle on for years.
Oh, I know, me too. It's a dangerous combination, I think, the two of us talking. We end up just talking all night. So just one kind of last thing, I guess, before we wrap up. You said much earlier, years ago now, I think it might have been, that you were playing Ghosts of Tsushima. Ghosts of
Sushi. That's right.
Ghosts of Sushi, which I think is an overcooked expansion, maybe.
Yeah. Ghost of Tsushima.
So yeah, have you got any kind of experiences of that, like just in general? Like, I've not played it, but or is there anything that you got your eye on apart from Everwild, obviously, which is already pre-ordered? But
Ghost of Tsushima is taking up most of my hours at the moment, just because I'm that awful habit. I have to read every bloody document and everything I come across. So I wish I could just do the campaign and close it, and that's me done with it. But I just like, that's it. Like, if it's a 40-hour game, then that's like a 50-hour commitment for me. So,
yeah.
But I mean, one of the things I'm really loving about that is that they've actually sort of, it has that thing where there's lots of things across a map for you to sort of go and check out, and you're sort of picking from all the different pop-up things, calling you to them. But then one thing that really surprised me is a lot of those actually are just like about quiet reflection. And in a game where you're constantly killing people and crossing a sort of a huge epic war of, samurai versus Mongolian, to actually have these moments where you sit down and you actually write a haiku while reflecting on what you've been doing recently, or you take a bath in the hot springs and just sort of find out a little bit more about what's going on in your character's head, I think is really rare and really cool. So that's got me energized at the moment. While I'm mourning Cyberpunk's delay.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Keanu Reeves will be back on us.
He will, yeah.
Back soon. But yes, another game there that has phenomenal potential to create, I guess, not only experiences from following the main story, but the individual player's experience of the world. It looks so wealthy in its depth of environment, narrative, and everything that
I'm going to spend a lot of time reading documents. It's going to be it's going to be a long one, that one.
Yes, it is. I think I'm going to have to occasionally drop in on you and make sure you're still in the land of the living rather than yes, absolutely. Okay, and just to kind of wrap up, I know we spoke previously about your journey and what you did to help yourself get to where you are, but would you kind of have any advice for students, both those that are maybe looking hopefully after listening to this and thinking, well, that Brendan guy, he's really cool, I want to be like him, which would absolutely...
Can't imagine
that. Well, I don't know, maybe, you paint a really nice picture of how you've just kind of, you've worked hard, obviously, but this kind of evolution into where you are now from where you were during your degree, and the incredible work that you've had to put in. And would you kind of have any advice for students who are maybe in their first, second year, maybe even their third year, and kind of they've got that I want to do games, but I don't know how or where?
Yeah, I think if games are something that's fun to you and something that you could see yourself doing and really enjoying, then putting in that time and energy towards making small proof of concept demos of your ability, whether, whatever discipline within games you're interested in, whether it's sort of tech art or level design, look at other portfolios online and look at what other people are doing to showcase themselves, and build out something that you personally feel demonstrates like the best of your ability. Because I think that's one of the things I did early on that maybe didn't help me, is I sort of wrote my first portfolio and was like, cool, why is no one interested? I don't get it.
Yeah.
But actually, sort of on reflection, you sort of realize, well, actually, I don't think at the time that was the best of my ability. I don't think like I thought that was. So it's just like, put in that time and effort to really showcase the extent of what you can do, and then just be persistent with it, because it's, not going to be the next day that someone turns around and says, hey man, like, let's go. It's can be a rocky road. But once, that's, even if it's a rocky road, that's not to say that people don't want you to join the industry, or that you're being like gatekept. Like, you absolutely, people want like really cool, talented people to come along with new ideas and shake things up.
Yeah. And I guess it's kind of finding your own way of sharing those ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can, save them for the applications, or if you're, really proud of something, post it online, get people to retweet it, get it in front of people. There's also no reason, with respect, but to sort of reach out to people who you're a fan of in the games industry, or people who are working at studios you're interested in, and sort of, they'll decide how much input or how much they can sort of offer, but they can offer some advice. They may even offer to take a look at some samples or that sort of thing. Like, I know, without naming them to get them bombarded, but I know when I was sort of in those stages of wanting to join the industry, there were people who I reached out to just to sort of get their advice, or, see what they thought about how I was doing, and if, they had any advice. And, there were plenty who sort of either sort of didn't have time, didn't respond, or would sort of respond politely, but you sort of understand, right, okay, you're probably like stressed out of your mind. But then there were the odd few who were like really engaged and really lovely and really encouraging. And especially at the moment, I think because networking events and game jams are much more difficult, which would have been something that I would have said, go along to these events, that kind of thing. Definitely, like, with respect as to how much time they may have, just reach out to people and
Nice.
put yourself out there and network with people.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, I can't really thank you enough for your time. As you actually just said, you've got to take into consideration how busy other people are, and that's it. I'm using your words against you.
Oh, no.
But no, I really do appreciate it. And, under normal circumstances, we would have had you in, and I'm sure we would have had a room full of eager faces staring at you. And actually, maybe this is easier.
This is easier for me, but I won't close the door on anything once the world opens up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, on behalf of all my students and everyone, I just want to say thank you very, very much. It's I found it really interesting, actually, just to have that discussion and see what you're working on, and sort of see what makes you tick, and all the advice and information that you offered up. So thank you very much. I have asked Brendan about question taking. If you're interested, he has very, very kindly offered up his Twitter handle, which I will put at the end of this video. If you want to get in touch with him, obviously kind of let him know that you are a Coventry student or whatever, and you got his information through the video on narrative design. Or if you have any questions or anything, he's more than happy to help you out. So thank you again, Brendan, and thank you to everyone who's listened. Thanks for your time. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with me or use Brendan's Twitter handle coming up. Thank you.